My name is Scarlet. I am 24 years old, and I live in Washington. What I'm about to share with you isn't just a story. It's a piece of my heart that I've carried in silence for too long. It's the kind of experience that never really leaves you, no matter how many years pass or how far you run from it. When people ask me about my first love, I don't know how to answer. I can't say it was my high school sweetheart or a boy I met at a party. Because the truth is, the first person I ever truly loved was someone I never expected to fall for. He wasn't someone I should have loved at all. He was my teacher. I was 17 when I met Mr. Reynolds. It was my junior year of high school, and I had just transferred to a new school after my parents separated. My dad stayed back in Oregon while my mom moved us to Washington, hoping to start fresh. But for me, nothing felt fresh. Everything felt unfamiliar, cold, and empty. I was the new girl with too many books in her bag and too many thoughts in her head. I didn't talk much. I didn't smile much either. My grades were the only thing I had control over, so I poured myself into them. That's how I ended up in Mr. Reynolds' AP English class. He wasn't what I expected. Most teachers at our school were stiff, tired-looking adults who just went through the motions. But Mr. Reynolds, he was different. He was in his early 30s, sharp-minded with a calm demeanor and eyes that held a quiet kind of wisdom. He had a way of talking about literature that made it feel like the most important thing in the world. I remember the first time he discussed The Catcher in the Rye. He didn't just summarize the book. He dove into it, pulled it apart, made it breathe. He spoke like Holden Caulfield was a real person, someone he knew, someone we all could be. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift in me. He noticed me too. Not just in the way teachers notice a student who does their homework, but in a way that felt deeper. He would ask me questions during discussions, challenge my interpretations, encourage me to explore my ideas further. He told me I had a rare voice and that my writing had the power to move people. No one had ever said that to me before. At first, I told myself it was nothing. He was just being a good teacher, the kind who cared. But as weeks turned into months, something unspoken began to build between us. It started with longer conversations. After class, I'd linger at his desk and he never rushed me. We talked about books, of course, but also about life, my parents' divorce, my fears about college, my uncertainty about who I was becoming. He listened with genuine interest, and his advice was always thoughtful, never condescending. I felt seen in a way I never had before. One day it rained so hard school dismissed early. I didn't have a ride home, and the front office was a madhouse of students calling their parents. Mr. Reynolds found me sitting quietly near the lockers, hugging my books to my chest. He offered to wait with me in the classroom until things calmed down. I hesitated but nodded. It felt safer with him than anywhere else. We sat in his classroom for almost an hour that day, just talking. The rain tapped against the windows like a lullaby, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peaceful. He told me about his own high school years, how he was a loner too, how books saved him when people didn't. I remember looking at him and wondering what it must have been like for him to feel the way I did now. We weren't so different. After all, from that day on, our bond deepened. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was emotional, spiritual, built on shared silence and mutual understanding. I began staying after class more often, sometimes just to sit in the back and write while he graded papers. He never asked me to leave. In fact, he began offering feedback on my writing that went far beyond the classroom. He told me I had something special, and he meant it. I remember once he handed me a copy of Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar and said, "I think you'll see yourself in this." He was right. That book cracked something open inside me. I wrote him a letter after I finished. Not an assignment, just something I needed to get out. I poured my heart into it, told him how much the story resonated with me, how much I appreciated him for giving it to me. I didn't expect a reply. But the next day, he left a note on my desk. "You see the world more clearly than most adults." I know. Don't let anyone dim that. That note stayed with me for years. Things got trickier after that. I started thinking about him all the time. Not just in class, but at home, on weekends, in dreams. I'd watch his every move, notice the way he tucked his shirt in, the way his lips curled when he smiled at a student's clever answer. I knew it was wrong. I knew it wasn't supposed to happen. But the more I tried to distance myself, the more I was pulled in. Around spring break, I wrote a short story for a statewide competition. It was about a girl who falls in love with someone unattainable, a man too old, too complicated, too off limits. I didn't say it was about him, but I think he knew. When he read it, he looked at me longer than usual. "There's honesty in here," he said softly. "Pain, too. You're incredibly brave." That was the first time I saw something shift. In him. He started acting different, not in a drastic way, but enough that I could feel it. He avoided being alone with me for too long. He responded to my notes with more caution. Once, I reached for a book at the same time he did, and our hands touched. He pulled back like he'd been burned. I couldn't blame him. He was doing everything he could to protect me, to protect both of us. But I was already too far gone. I'd fallen in love with him completely. The end of the school year came faster than I expected. Graduation loomed ahead, and with it, the inevitable separation. I felt sick at the thought of never seeing him again. I started making excuses to visit his classroom even when I didn't have class with him anymore. I brought him coffee once and told him it was a thank you for all his help. He smiled but didn't touch the cup. On my last day, I left a letter on his desk. I didn't say I loved him, but I said everything else. I thanked him for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me a safe place to exist when the rest of the world felt unbearable. I told him I'd never forget him, and I meant it. I didn't hear from him after that. Not for a long time. I went to college, tried to move on, but a part of me still lingered in that classroom, still sat by the window listening to rain, still waited for his words to make me feel whole. And then, 2 years later, completely out of the blue, I got an email from him. It was brief, polite, almost formal. He said he hoped I was doing well, that he'd read one of my published essays online and was proud of how far I'd come. He said I'd always had a voice worth listening to. It was that message that changed everything. It reopened doors I thought were locked forever, because as much as I had tried to forget, I never truly had. And it was in that moment, reading those few carefully chosen words, that I realized something. The bond we shared had never truly ended. It had only been waiting for the right time, for the right conditions, for the line between teacher and student to finally disappear. That's where the next chapter of our story begins. That email sat in my inbox for days before I could bring myself to respond. I must have read it 100 times, every word echoing, in my head like the familiar rhythm of a forgotten song. "I read your piece online," he wrote. "I always knew your voice would find its way into the world." It was a simple sentence, but coming from him, it stirred something deep inside me that I thought had been buried for good. I was 19 then, in my sophomore year of college, majoring in creative writing. Life had settled into a rhythm. Classes, late-night study sessions, coffee dates with friends who didn't know the version of me that once existed. No one at college knew about Mr. Reynolds. To them, he was just another name, a shadow in a chapter I never read aloud. I had tried to bury him in my past, convince myself it had all been a teenage fantasy. But his email, it cracked the door, open again, just enough for all those old feelings to seep through. I waited 4 days before replying, trying to strike the perfect balance between casual and composed. "It's so good to hear from you," I wrote. "That essay wouldn't exist without your early encouragement. Thank you for always believing in me." I hesitated before clicking send, fingers hovering over the mouse, heart pounding like I was 17 again. When I finally hit the button, it felt like throwing a stone into a quiet lake. No idea how far the ripples would spread. He replied the next day. That's how it started. A series of emails, polite at first, growing gradually warmer. He asked about college, what I was reading, if I still carried a notebook everywhere. I told him about my favorite professors, the workshop class that challenged me, the boy I dated briefly but never connected with. Our conversation slipped back into the ease we once had, like no time had passed at all. I didn't see him as my teacher anymore. He wasn't grading my essays or standing at a podium. He was just Adam. I started calling him that in my head. Adam. It felt strange at first, almost rebellious, but also intimate. I never used his first name in emails, though. Not yet. Some invisible line still held us apart, but with every message, we edged closer to it. Eventually, we started texting. Then came the phone calls. I would lie on my dorm bed at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to his voice on the other end of the line. We talked about everything: books, dreams, disappointments. He told me about how he left teaching after my class graduated, how it wasn't the same anymore, how the passion faded. He was working as an editor for a small publishing house now, living in Seattle, alone. He never married. Neither of us said the thing that hung between us like fog. We danced around it, teased the edges, but never spoke it aloud. I wanted him to say it first, that he missed me, that I mattered, that those moments we shared in his classroom weren't just meaningful to me. But he didn't. Not yet. It wasn't until spring break of that year that everything changed. I was home in Washington for the week, staying with my mom. We hadn't spoken much since I left for college. Distance had dulled our bond. She worked long shifts, and I spent most of my time holed up in my room, writing or reading. One evening, after a particularly long and lonely day, I texted Adam, "Do you want to meet up for coffee? Just to catch up?" My finger hovered over the screen. I almost deleted it. He responded 5 minutes later, "I'd like that. Tomorrow?" We met at a quiet cafe near the waterfront. One of those cozy places with mismatched chairs and indie music playing low in the background. I got there first, nervous, heart racing like I was walking into a final exam. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him at first. His hair was a little grayer, his beard more trimmed, but the moment our eyes met, it all came rushing back. That bond, that gravity. He smiled, and I swear the world slowed down. We hugged. It was brief but warm. I could feel his hesitation, the careful way his hands rested on my shoulders instead of my back. We sat by the window, sipped lattes, and talked like we hadn't spent years apart. But something was different now. We were adults, equals. There was no classroom between us, no authority, no boundaries set by rules. It was just two people reconnecting, or so we told ourselves. After an hour, neither of us wanted to leave. The sun had started to set, painting the sky in soft golds and purples. "Do you want to go for a walk?" he asked. I nodded, and we wandered down to the pier. The conversation shifted to deeper things: regrets, dreams never pursued, feelings never voiced. I confessed how hard it had been to leave high school behind, how much he meant to me, even if I never said it. He stopped walking, looked at me. I knew, he said quietly. I felt it too, but I couldn't act on it. You were my student, Scarlet. It would have been wrong. I felt my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. But I'm not your student now, I whispered. He looked away. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope, and then slowly, he reached for my hand. That was the moment. The exact second we crossed the line. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. Just a simple touch, his fingers curling gently around mine. But it changed everything. It told me that the bond we shared had never been just about literature or late-night conversations. It had always been something more. We stood there for a long time, our hands intertwined, the water lapping gently at the shore beside us. When he finally looked at me again, his eyes were full of conflict and longing. I've thought about you so many times, he admitted. I tried to forget. I thought I had, but seeing you again. His voice trailed off, thick with emotion. We didn't talk much after that. He drove me home, and the car ride was filled with silence that said more than words ever could. When we pulled into my driveway, I hesitated before opening the door. Scarlet, he said, stopping me. Are you sure you want this? Because if we keep going, there's no going back. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who once opened my mind to stories, who saw something in me when no one else did. The man who never once crossed a line when he was my teacher, even when I desperately wished he would. I'm sure, I said, and I meant it. That night, I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed around midnight. It was him. I can't stop thinking about you. I responded, come over. He didn't, not that night. But the next day we met again. This time at a bookstore halfway between our towns. We browsed quietly, making jokes about terrible book covers and pretending like we weren't, slowly falling into something dangerous. When we left, we drove in his car to a quiet overlook and sat there for hours. We talked, held hands, leaned into each other, and then, finally, he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or clumsy. It was soft, careful, full of years of unspoken emotions. That kiss carried every unsent letter, every lingering glance, every moment we held back in that classroom. From there, it escalated fast. We started seeing each other in secret. I'd take the train to Seattle on weekends, telling my friends I was visiting a cousin. We'd spend long hours in his apartment, reading, writing, making love like we were the only two people in the world. He would cook for me, tell me I was brilliant, run his fingers through my hair and say I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. It was intoxicating. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen. But even in our quietest moments, there was always a shadow hanging over us. We didn't tell anyone, not our families, not our friends. There was an unspoken agreement between us. This love was real, but it was fragile. We protected it like a flame in a storm. Sometimes I would catch him staring at me with this look, a mixture of awe and guilt. And I understood. We had broken a rule, even if it wasn't illegal. People wouldn't understand. They'd reduce our story to a headline, make him a villain and me a victim. But that's not how it felt. It never felt like that. Still, the weight of secrecy began to press down on us. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to exist in the world beside him without shame or fear. But every time I brought it up, he'd change the subject. One evening, I asked him directly, "Are you ashamed of me?" His face dropped. "No," he said. "Never. But the world, they'll never see us the way we see each other." I began to wonder if we were living in a fantasy. If love, no matter how deep, could survive in the shadows. I wanted a future, a life where I didn't have to hide. But every time I tried to reach for it, reality would pull me back. The more we tried to hold on, the more things began to crack. And deep down, I think we both knew. Crossing the line had changed everything. And some lines, once crossed, leave scars that never fully fade. That's when the consequences began to show themselves. And when everything we had built together started to unravel. There's a strange kind of beauty in forbidden things, how they burn brighter, feel deeper, and linger longer. But what no one tells you is that their beauty is only matched by their destruction. Loving Adam felt like standing in a fire and refusing to move, because for a while, the warmth was worth the burn. But even the most beautiful fire leaves behind ash. We kept our relationship hidden for almost a year. I traveled back and forth between campus and Seattle, my weekends cloaked in secrecy. My roommates assumed I was spending time with friends, sometimes even an off-campus boyfriend, and I let them believe it. I stopped sharing the details of my life. I stopped writing about love altogether. What we had was too sacred and too fragile to put into words. But secrets have a way of growing heavier over time. They don't just sit quietly inside you. They claw, they stretch, they whisper doubts into your ear until even the most tender moments begin to tremble. What started as magic between us slowly began to fray. It started with the little things. Adam becoming more distant during our time. Together, checking his phone more, talking about work stress more often than us. I tried to brush it off. Relationships had ups and downs. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that something had changed, that the dream we'd built together was beginning to crack beneath the weight of the real world. I wanted more from him. More time, more security, more certainty. I wanted to know where we were going. I asked if he ever saw us living openly, if he could imagine a future where we told people the truth. He hesitated before answering. "I don't know, Scarlet," he said one night, after a long silence. "I love you, but our story, it's not like other stories. It comes with judgment. It comes with consequences." I remember sitting there in his apartment, the same apartment that once felt like a safe haven, and realizing that maybe love wasn't enough. That no matter how much we cared for each other, we existed in a gray space, never fully wrong, never entirely right. And then everything came crashing down. It was late spring. I was finishing my junior year, already juggling finals, when I received an email from my university's administration. Someone had anonymously submitted a concern about an inappropriate relationship between me and a former teacher, someone they alleged I had continued to see romantically. At first, I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely read the rest of the message. I hadn't done anything illegal. Our relationship had only started after I graduated high school, but that didn't matter. The idea of being exposed, of having our story twisted and judged, terrified me. I called Adam in a panic. "It's going to be okay," he said, but his voice didn't sound sure. The university launched an informal inquiry. Because he wasn't employed there, they had no real authority over him, but they did want to know if I was emotionally safe, if I had been manipulated, if the relationship had truly started after graduation. They asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. They dissected moments I had kept buried in my heart. It felt like someone was peeling back my memories, layer by layer, until there was nothing left but raw nerve. And Adam. He pulled away. Whether it was fear or guilt or self-preservation, I'll never fully know. But during the time I needed him most, he became a shadow. His texts grew colder. His calls came less often. When I asked him to speak to the university on my behalf, to confirm that nothing inappropriate had ever happened while I was his student, he hesitated again. "I don't want to be dragged through the mud," he said. "What if it ruins my career? What if they think I groomed you?" That word hit like a slap. I had never thought of myself as a victim, never saw him as a predator. We were two people who had fallen in love under complicated circumstances. But now that love was being rewritten into something else, something dirty, something shameful. I was cleared by the university in the end. They found no reason to pursue disciplinary action, no evidence of a violation. But by that time, the damage had already been done. Word had spread. Whispers followed me across campus. Friends stopped inviting me out. Professors looked at me differently. And Adam? He stopped calling. No explanation. No final conversation. Just silence. Like everything we shared had been a passing season. Beautiful, intense, but never meant to last. I spiraled for a while. Lost weight. Stopped writing. My grades slipped. My mom tried to reach out, sensing something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. How do you explain heartbreak when it's the kind that no one thinks should have happened in the first place? I missed him like a phantom limb. Every corner of my life felt haunted by him. The books we read, the music we shared, the poems he once scribbled in my notebook. I even saved his voice messages, replaying them when the nights got too quiet. But slowly, painfully, I began to crawl out of that dark place. It started with my writing. I picked up a pen one night and started telling our story. Not to justify it, not to defend it, but to understand it. I wrote about the girl who fell in love with her teacher, about the man who didn't cross the line until it was safe, but even then couldn't handle what came after. I wrote about love that bloomed in silence and wilted in the spotlight. It wasn't a happy story, but it was mine. I submitted it anonymously to a literary magazine under the title The Cost of Forbidden Love. They published it. It didn't go viral or anything. But it resonated. People left comments, shared their own stories. Some judged, some empathized. But the act of releasing it into the world gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Years have passed since then. I'm 24 now, and I've built a life I'm proud of. I'm working as an editor for a small publishing company, just like Adam once did. Funny how life circles back like that. I still write, still carry that quiet fire inside me, but I write with clearer eyes now, no longer blinded by longing. I haven't heard from Adam in over 3 years. Sometimes I wonder where he is, if he's happy, if he ever thinks about me, if he regrets how things ended. But I've stopped waiting for answers, because love, especially the forbidden kind, doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it just leaves scars that become stories. And mine is this. I loved my teacher. Not because he saved me, not because he was perfect, but because, in that moment of my life when I was lost and broken and hungry for meaning, he saw me. He gave me something real. And while that love came at a cost, of trust, of reputation, of innocence, I wouldn't erase it. I no longer live in the shadow of what we were. I live in the light of what I've become because of it. If you're listening to this, and you've ever loved someone you weren't supposed to, know that you're not alone. And your story, no matter how messy or complicated, still matters. Because even forbidden love teaches us something. About risk, about heartbreak, about resilience, and, maybe most of all, about how to love ourselves when the fire dies out.